you've got questions, well, we've got answers, and we have the man to answer them, Jeffrey Levine from Buckingham Wealth Partners. Jeffrey, welcome back to another episode of Ask the Hammer.
It's good to be with you.
Great to have you here. I have a question in my inbox. It's from a woman who's about to go through a divorce, and she's seeking some advice around discovering marital assets in a divorce proceeding.
Well, this is one that unfortunately is all too common these days, right? When couples go through a divorce, it can become contentious. And if someone knows that they're likely to go through a divorce, sometimes it can be very smooth and it's just like, hey, life is not working out together. Let's do what we can to have this be, as good for the kids as we can, all that sort of. And sometimes people start to do some shady stuff beforehand. They start to hide income. They start to hide assets. And one of the first things to consider is, do you need professional help? There is an entire field called forensic accounting that effectively looks back at these things, will trace down documents, and is dedicated to uncovering assets where they are, uncovering income, where it went, et cetera, to find out, was it really a, $700 bill to fix the broken pipe, or did that $700 actually go to a hotel room somewhere that was spent on some other type of expenses, right? Like, those are the types of things that a forensic accountant can dive into. And if you're concerned, hiring a professional is always a one way to go. Beyond that, you want to look for verifiable documents. So being able to, for instance, get a copy of, if you file separate tax returns, if you can get the copy of the tax return. If not, some other things you can do are requesting IRS transcripts, because individuals, most of the income individuals receive is typically reported. We have 1099s for interest, for sole proprietor income, right? You would get a 1099 for that income. If you're an employee, you've got a W-2 for your wages and your bonuses. If there's retirement accounts, those have 5498. So you can start to get a sense of what accounts are out there. If you see a 1099 on interest from an account you didn't know existed, now you can start to ask those questions. Now, of course, the other thing to keep in mind here is that you have to figure out what is a marital asset and what is not a marital asset in a divorce. And that can be a little bit complicated. It goes to the timing of when those assets were effectively, when you purchased them, how those assets were purchased, with what sort of money. In some cases, it may mean keeping assets from a prior divorce or even an inheritance in separate accounts. So simply understanding the rules in general of what constitutes a marital asset is really important. And then one final thought here is that in general, courts in many states, what they do is what they call equitable distribution. Now, many people, when they hear equitable distribution, they don't actually hear equitable. Somebody might say equitable. What they hear is equal distribution. Equal does not necessarily mean equitable. And courts have a wide degree of, family courts have a wide degree of latitude when deciding what is and what is not an equitable distribution of those assets that were marital. So in some cases, a court may say, like, hey, this person's got $2 million of non-marital assets. We can't split the marital assets 50-50. It will leave this other person destitute. Maybe they get slightly more. Again, it's not equal, but the court might find it equitable.
So I know you said your final or last thought on the subject, but as you know more, your answers beget questions. So a couple that I thought of as you were talking, one is
Sure.
This notion of, in some cases, it might be hard to find assets if you're dealing with maybe with an executive, perhaps who has stock options or non-qualified deferred comp and other exotic employee benefits.
Sure. This is where, again, having the right team around you. This is why sometimes divorces get very messy, right? Because you may need to go to court, you may need to subpoena documents or other testimony, things like that. So having a good divorce attorney is critically important in this. Oftentimes in these situations where there is a suspicion of malfeasance or something along those lines, that is where you're going to start to have the true team. You're going to have your attorney or attorneys. You're going to have your forensic accountants or accountants that are specifically trained in how to track down assets in divorce. You're going to have your financial advisor helping you to determine how much you need and which assets are best for you and how that's going to impact you tax-wise and all that sort of stuff. So it is truly, in many of these cases, creating a team to surround yourself with, because divorce is one of those times where there is a tremendous amount of change, often in a super short amount of time. And so it's very easy in those situations to have something go by or to not realize something, to let something slip through the cracks. And those slips through the crack, that slippage, could create even bigger problems than the divorce itself.
Yeah. And then talk just for a bit about how things are different in a community property state.
So in general, community property versus separate property states, the biggest difference in a community property state is effectively, while you are married, everything that you and or your spouse earn are equal. It is marital property. And the income you get belongs to both of you essentially equally. So even if you filed separate returns, you need to know what the other person earned effectively, because you report half of their income and they report half of yours. And from an asset perspective, it's sort of a situation that kind of violates the laws of physics, right? So you've got a hammer, I know, sitting on your desk, and you own that hammer 100%. And since you own that hammer 100%, it'd be very weird for me to say, I also own 100% of that hammer. Because clearly, if there's one hammer and it's 100% owned by one person, it should only be one, like you can only own 100%. Community property rules kind of violate the laws of physics in that regard, because both spouses are kind of deemed as owning 100%, not 50%, but 100% of the community property. And so oftentimes in divorce, you see a little bit more of an equal split in that regard. But once again, courts and family courts in particular have a good degree of latitude, and judges will often exercise some of their discretion in these matters.
Yeah. So all of this strikes me as highlighting the need for a prenuptial agreement.
You know, it's interesting. This is perhaps the single hardest area for me to advise on with people, because I've always been a believer of, I will not do for you what I wouldn't do for myself. As a professional, I totally am supportive of prenuptial agreements. I believe they help to deal with a lot of this and lay it out beforehand. At the same point, when I got married, I did not want one. I had no plans for one. I can't see myself ever using it. And so it's probably the one aspect of planning where I would generally recommend something different than what I would do for myself, simply because I was never personally comfortable with it. But I totally understand the reasons why someone would choose to do it. And in practice, it's becoming more and more common and acceptable today because it's less one-sided, right? Many decades ago, it was basically viewed as the man saying, here's what's mine. Today, thank goodness, we have still not there yet. We got a long way to go, but it's getting better towards, equal pay and so forth. Again, a long way to go, but at least better. We have more women in the workforce, more women becoming executives, et cetera. So now you see a lot of times women looking to institute those prenups to protect themselves as well. And so because it's a little bit more equally distributed, again, long way to go. Not saying we're equal, just getting better, trending in the right direction. It's one of those things that has become more accepted. And also younger people tend to be a little bit more accepting of these things than previous generations.
Well, you answered our Rita's question and then every single one I had to ask after that.
Well, this is fun. Let's do it again sometime. Help Bob and I have some fun. Give us a shout. Email us with your questions at askthehammer@buckinghamgroup.com. Again, that's askthehammer@buckinghamgroup.com. And Bob and I look forward to tackling your questions real soon.